All the notes will be online, and you can get them in a PDF file if you want to read them or something later. But there's a lot of stuff today, and this is an exciting topic to me. And you might sit there and say, "Oh my goodness, he's going to teach philosophy and all kinds of stuff this morning." And I'm telling you, at the very end, I'm going to wrap it all up and tell you why this is important. All right? I can't tell you that yet, but I will tell you about 5 or 6 things at the end about why this is important. And the issue we've been looking at is the nature of God, the one we serve. And what we're looking at today is God is eternal. And you're going to stand and say, "Well, I know that." Well, let me challenge you. God is eternal and what that means. Thomas, I will also be reading some things this morning because I can't memorize all this stuff. And a lot of times I have it memorized or I learn it and I know it. Today I'm going to read a lot. So kind of listen. As Jonathan Edwards preached the greatest sermon ever preached to his church, and he read the entire sermon. And there were people falling everywhere in the aisles, terrified of what he preached. He preached about sinners in the hands of an angry God, but he read the entire sermon. We are so used to television and being entertained that it's really hard for us to listen without being entertained. Isn't that right? Our children are even worse than we are, and they want to be entertained. And there comes a time when, God just speaks and you don't get entertained, you just listen. And so today's going to be lots of listening. So I'll read quickly, you listen quickly. Okay? And we'll get this down. Thomas Boston was pastor in 1699 to 1731. A biography wrote of his ministry: if Scotland had been searched during the early part of the 18th century, there was not a minister of Christ within its bounds who, both in personal character and in the discharge of his pastoral functions, approached nearer the apostolic model than did this man, Thomas Boston. When Boston sought to explain the nature of God in his commentary in the Westminster Shorter Catechism, most of us look at the Catechism as kind of the definitive statement about theology for us. He wrote about this man called Simonides, a heathen poet. And this heathen poet was asked by the king of Syracuse, "What is God?" And when he asked Simonides about what is God, Simonides said, "Well, I tell you what, let me think about it. Give me a day to think about it." And then the next day he came and he said, "Give me another day. Give me 2 days." And then the next time in 2 days came, he said, "Well, give me 4 days." And finally the king is wondering, and he said, "Well, do you know now after 4 more days?" He said, "Well, give me 8 days. 8 more days." And the king said, "All right." And after 8 more days, he said, "Give me 16 more days." And finally the king was catching on that every time he asked him the answer, he kept doubling the time. And he said to him, "Why in the world are you doing this? What are you trying to say?" And the answer from the poet, an ungodly man, said this: "The more I think of God, he is still the more dark and unknown to me." Now, God cannot be understood by us. He is far past our understanding. He is far past our comprehension. And when you think about that, everything in life is all about what I want, what I enjoy, what I experience, what I think. And when you start thinking about God, you start thinking, listen, this is way past my pay level. Right? Way past what I'm capable of. And now some people just say, "Oh, well, who cares?" And I'm challenging you today, it matters what we think about God. And that he is far past where we are. Boston comments about this man in his response. He said, now this is Boston is the pastor talking about what the heathen poet wrote. And he said, "Indeed, no wonder that he made such an answer. For he that would tell what God is in a measure suitable to his excellency and glory had need to know God even as he is known of him, which is not competent to any man upon earth." You cannot know God. You can only get a glimpse in an idea of him. So for us to say, "Well, I know God's eternal," is to be very flippant and very, very misunderstanding of the vastness and the greatness of the God we serve and the one who lives in us. And I'm challenging you today to expand your thinking about the implications of the character of God and what he's like. You know, there is something about the significance of what we believe about God. It changes what we do. You and I live up to our view of God, or we live down to our minimal view of God. And I'm challenging you to think bigger about God in order to change your behavior, to become consistent with God. In fact, your behavior is consistent with your belief about God. Now think about that. That's a very deep statement. Your behavior is consistent with your understanding of God, or your lack of understanding of God. So if you can expand your understanding of God, you will change how you act. For instance, if you think God doesn't care, will it make any difference in your life? Yeah, it'll absolutely change everything if you think God doesn't care. If God doesn't care what you say or do, then you'll do whatever you want. So your view of God, even in that area, changes how we act. And so I'm challenging at that. In 1952, Mortimer Adler co-edited a series of philosophy essays for Encyclopedia Britannica. You say, okay, 1952, they had books back then. No Kindles, no computers, no internet. So they asked him to write a series of philosophy essays. When asked why his article on God was the longest, he said, and I quote, "More consequences for thought and actions follow from the affirmation or denial of God than from answering any other question. God is significant, and what we think about him is significant." Isaiah Berlin, the philosopher, he was an Oxford professor, president of the Aristotelian Society, founder and first president of the Wolfson College, Oxford. He was knighted in 1957, awarded the Order of Merit in 1971, and president of the British Academy. He said this, quote, "The world of a man who believes that God created him for a specific purpose, that he has an immortal soul, that there is an afterlife in which his sins will be visited upon him, is radically different from the world of a man who believes in none of these things. And the reasons for action, the moral codes, the political beliefs, the tastes, the personal relationships of the former will deeply and systematically differ from those of the latter." You and I are different because of the God we believe in. The world out there, they don't care about what God is like. In fact, they have manufactured God into the God they want him to be. And then they live accordingly, don't they? It's amazing to us, when Joe and I were talking about this last night, about how many people it used to be when someone was just a rank sinner and didn't go to church and wasn't a Christian, they just said, "Yeah, I'm going to hell, I'm going with all my friends." You know, they didn't care. They don't say that today. You know what they say? We're all going to heaven. They're not accountable to God. They don't think it matters, because they've created God in their own image. They've created the God that they serve. And they create that God so that they can now do whatever they want. They don't serve the God of the Bible. What is amazing to me is there's an awful lot of Christians who serve a God they have created. A God who will say and do what they want. Why do children die? Why do people suffer in this world if there's a loving God? Have you ever heard that question? Why is there suffering if there's a loving God? If God's really a God of love, why do people suffer? As if they know better than God and his character is flawed, because they know what a God should be like, and since God is not like that, he's not worthy. One lady told Mary Jo at school, she said, "I believe in the God of the New Testament, not the God of the Old Testament." Well, you don't believe in the God of the Bible, do you? Why doesn't she like the God of the Old Testament? Well, I don't know. You've been reading through the Old Testament with us? What a scary dude. I mean, this guy's fiery. I mean, he gets upset. But he's different today, isn't he?